please give a round of applause for Tomasz.
Okay. 2019, I joined regional Scrum gathering in Beijing, and they closed the country for the next 2 years. So all disasters on me, especially your Alex. That's my fault. I talked to the organizer, but they still wanted to go. So Alex wanted me to warm up exercise, so I have one for you. Because we're still waiting for a few people, I believe. So here's the question for you. And try to have a conversation in pairs, in 3 people maybe. What is the most difficult thing you have, from Scrum, of course, because there's a Scrum conference. What is the most difficult thing when we have multiple teams working together? So what is your opinion on the most difficult part of Scrum? And let's have like 2 minutes conversation. If anyone join your team, then tell them what we're doing and explain that they need to join the conversation. So 2 minutes for you, and we'll follow up from there. So 2 minutes are over, so just yell out what you have figured out on your groups. What you have? Anyone?
We had a great conversation about dependencies, and you get into the review, and one team hasn't gotten some stuff done, and another team depends on. So dependencies can really be messed up in many different events in Scrum, like review,
Yes, and
stand-up.
if you notice, dependency is not element of Scrum.
Yeah, but we were talking about how it would, if you had them, it would surface in the review perhaps.
Yes.
And in the daily stand-up.
That's a great answer, not for my question, by the way. Thank you. What you have?
So one of the biggest ones was sprint planning. Because they have so many different things going on and so many different opinions, they just have no idea how to coordinate the chaos that they're under.
Okay, other opinions? Like 1 or 2 more.
One issue is that when there are multiple teams working in an agile team, so the SOS becomes important. So when you are doing Scrum of Scrum, then the alignment is sometimes challenging, number 1. Number 2 is retrospective. So there are like retrospective from each team, but you get some feedback against the other teams as well. So then you have to manage that, or you have to somehow adjust that with the other team or talk to other team. So that sometimes is a little bit challenging as well.
Yes, and Scrum of Scrum is not part of the Scrum. Last comment.
I find the retrospective quite difficult. Like the deadline is there and the team is working, the work is almost done, and the sprint is ending. After the sprint ended, I call for the team to get for the retrospective meeting, but they are like, okay, let's get this over with. I do not have time for it. Ask the questions. Okay, it's not interactive.
Okay, great answer. And I'm not going to take more because of the time constraint we have. Here's my take on this one. The biggest challenge I see when we have many teams working together is having working software at the end of every sprint. So having an increment, working increment every sprint, this is the biggest challenge companies have. And I'm going to show you why it's mostly common in the organization. So here's my story. What you can see here, I have 3 teams. So what is usually happening is that we have teams, they have some of their responsibilities. So let's assume this is like that may be front-end team, backend, some mobile team. That could be some, processing team. So for example, you collect data here, you proceed the data here, and you generate output on here. For example, if you're working in telco, then what you have is you collect the data usage, you generate some information about this one, and at the end you have an invoice with the fee based on how much data you have used. Super simple idea, right? And most cases what we discover is that to deliver something that has a value for the customer, we need to have several teams working together, and that is how we come up with the dependencies. So what we end up with is that many times, if you look from the organization perspective, is that your backlog look like this way. So there can be a feature that touch just one team, but often what we discover is that you have a number of features that requires different teams to work together. Now, I'm drawing just 3 teams, not because this is the most common case, but because I can show you the problem on 3 teams, and it's easier and faster to do this with 3 teams rather than 55 teams you may have right now in your organization. So if you have more than 3 teams, it also applies to you. So here's the situation. Let's assume this is the company backlog, from the company backlog. Now, each of the team, because remember, we've been to Agile training, we've been to Scrum training, so we are already Agile now. So each of these team usually having product owners, and there's product owners usually having a backlog on their own, and the backlog is a representative of this backlog, basically. So the first sprint start, and what happened usually on the first sprint? So the green team look at the backlog and say, hey, this is the most important item we need to work on. And because there are no dependencies, they basically end up working on this one and they deliver this one. Woohoo! We are Agile now. But what is happening with the other teams, they start working on their things, but they cannot finish, because there is part of the system that need to be done by the other team. And what we discover in this case is that we end sprint with half of the feature done. So basically what we don't have at the end of the sprint is we don't have this increment. But that was just the first sprint, so let's move forward. Maybe the next sprint will be easier. So we start the next sprint. Well, the green people, the green team, they look at the backlog and they say, hey, this is the most important item we have right now, so let's work on this one. So they do their part, and what they do usually discover after doing their part, it doesn't work with each other. You've been there before. I know you've seen this one before. So you do your part, the other team do your part, and it doesn't work with each other. So they go to this team and they say, hey guys, your part doesn't work, So this is something you mentioned about retrospective. Your part doesn't work, but those people are say, hey, I'm sorry, but this sprint we're busy working on this item. So sorry guys, we are not able to help you because we're working on this one. Now, I'm gonna go back to red team in a few minutes. So the next sprint, what is usually happening is that we may be able to finish another item because let's say red people will go back to this one and they will solve this one. So we have this one deliver, but we ended up with having more and more and more work in progress because what is red team going to do in this case? When they look at the top of the organizational backlog and there is nothing important to work on, what they usually do, they do one of two things. What they do? I'm sorry? Yeah, so what they usually do, they look at the backlog because remember, those people has their own product owner and this product owner has a backlog and there is something on the top of this backlog. From the organizational perspective, it's somewhere here, but from their perspective, it is super important. So one thing they're gonna do, they're gonna start this item. You know what? It's pretty dependent on green team, and the green team has a long backlog, so they won't take care of this one for the next 2 years, but you know what? We are agile now, and we can deliver incrementally. So this is going to be in progress for the next 2 years, most likely. The second option, usually what is going to happen, they're gonna take care of refactor because they have nothing to do, so they're going to refactor. And the moment someone comes to them and say, hey, we need the help from your team, what they're gonna say? We're busy refactoring. So you end up having a lot of work in progress, but there are more things to happen with this solution. So you need several sprints. So you need several sprints to deliver anything that has a value. But the next question we come up with is like, who is going to test this software? And you know what? None of these teams has an end-to-end perspective. So you know what? We have devs, but we also need to have a separate QAs. And the next question is, who is going to deploy this to production? Again, none of those teams can do this one. So we have the separate ops team, which is going to deploy it to production. But the question is, how do they come up with this approach? How do they split this feature into several teams? Well, we need someone that will come up with architecture. We need someone to come up with requirements. So we have analysts, and we have architects. We know this model before, right? You've seen this before. You haven't seen this yesterday. Kira was showing this one to you. So we used to call it waterfall, but now you know we've been to agile training, so it cannot be waterfall anymore, it needs to be agile. Because we've been on agile trainings, these are not the developers, this is the Scrum team now. This is Agile QA, this is DevOps, and this is Agile Analyst, and this is Agile Architects. By the way, because it takes years to deliver anything in our company, we have a large work in progress. So what we discover is that we need to have a lot of coordinators who will be making sure that those initiatives, those PBIs, the big one, move slowly to being delivered. Again, we used to call them project managers, but again, remember we've been to Agile training, so they are either now Agile project managers or the Scrum Masters. And this is pretty common. And this is not, again, this is not something you can change easily, but most cases, the way you're going to see this is the problem, you're going to see three things. First thing you're going to see is that you have no end-to-end responsibility on team level. So basically, the teams, they cannot talk to user because they are responsible for the component. And you've seen this one before, I believe, right? So the teams have no idea to talk, about what to talk with the users, because there is no reason to talk about the users, because we're responsible just about the component. And you know what? Business is not coming for our review because they don't care, because we don't talk about business on our review. We just talk about our components. So business doesn't care about your API. Business doesn't care about your part of the system. They care about the value. And in this scenario, you cannot show the value, or relish you can show the value, so no one cares. CEO is not going to come to your review because they don't care. And as a consequence of that, something I already mentioned, the next point is we're going to have a lot of work in progress. Because everything takes ages to deliver. Oh, thank you very much. I didn't want to remove Sally from the picture. Okay, so what we have, it takes months to deliver anything. So as a consequence, you have a lot of work in progress. So often what I see when I get into the organization doesn't have this backlog. They have no idea how many organizations are in progress. You have 20, 40, 50, hundreds. One case I saw 40 developers working on 200 items. And you know what, by the way, in this case, who are we gonna to, outsource? Most cases, the developers are going with the people who are gonna do the outsource, not the people who are manage the work, but the people who do the work. So, lot of work. So one of the things you can see is how many projects you have in progress. And if it's more than 5, no matter how big the organization is, then more likely you are here. But the most common way of discovering that you're here is something that was already mentioned. Dependencies, right? So you hear that we are dependent on other people. You hear that we need other people to work on. And you're being blocked every few minutes. You're being blocked every now and then. And because we have individual team backlogs, we won't stop to solve the problem. We'll be just working on more and more and more items, which lead to a lot of work in progress. So this is the most common situation, and I see many companies starting there. And if you are there, first of all, I'm sorry. And second of all, I'm going to show you what to do about this one. So let's move first of all to solution. There are 2 solutions I saw so far. So first of all, what we need to do is change the organizational structure. So you know what? There is a framework when you have a team that can deliver a value to customer. We call it Scrum. So what we need to do, we need to create a team that has all the competencies to deliver. In most cases, because your organization is big, you end up with having few teams rather than having one team. And this is the biggest change we need to make. Now, we have 2 options to go from this place. So first option is we create several teams, and each of these teams has their own product owner and their own backlog. But again, the difference between this scenario, let me just create the product owners for our teams. The difference between this scenario and this scenario is that here we have all competencies in each team. So now we can create something that has a value. So each team should have the competencies needed to deliver. So in these backlogs, in these 3 backlogs I'm drawing right now, you have something that has a value to the customer. So now you can talk about the value, now you can talk about the business. So examples like this could be like 3 different user group. So you, for example, have a internal user, external users, or different for Asia, different for Europe, different for Australia, or maybe different internal stakeholders. So you have a marketing, sales, customer support. You create the team and you give them the business to work on. So that is the option what I called 2.0. And by the way, this is the version I called 0.1. And the reason for this one is because you use the naming from Scrum and Agile, but you don't have much agility in this system. So the second version is, so 3.0 is we create one big backlog and we create one ultimate product owner, and we end up with having the same 3 teams working with one backlog. Now, there are pros and cons of both options. So 2.0 basically is easier. So if you think about the 3.0, then basically what you expect is like, if we have something at the top of the backlog, you expect all 3 teams to be able to work on this one, which is easier said than done, because if you have like 3 components, that may be easier, but if you have 50 components, that may be pretty difficult to have all the skills and all the knowledge inside the one team. And one of the reasons for this one is because you ended up with this solution, and often you have a component and you have just one person, let's call him John. So we have a John, and John has his own component. In banking, we usually call it the core of the system. And you have a John. John is almost retired, and he's the only person who can work on the system, on this specific part of the system. So you cannot have John in 3 teams, so you cannot have easily scale John. And this is the problem. This is the knowledge depth you have created in your organization for years. So this model is easier because each of those teams has their own specialization and they don't need to understand the whole system. But these systems give you something different. So many cases, what you discover in this model, that after a year or 2, what you discover is that there's some important feature to be done. And you have, let's say, it's here. So we have something that is super important to be done at the top of the backlog. And these teams work super hard to deliver this one. But the thing is that we have 2 more teams which have no idea, have no experience, has no knowledge, and they're working on their items. There is a value on those items, but it is a smaller value for these items. So the thing is that if you want to go fast, then this model is pretty cool. If your main measure is velocity, mentioned here a few times, then this is pretty cool. You deliver a lot. Your throughput is pretty great. But here what happened is, if we have something at the top of the backlog, which is super important, you can have more than one team working on this feature. Again, this is difficult, not just because of the people's skills, all knowledge about the system, about the components, or the technologies, because many times when you're working in banks, in corporates, then you have 50 different technologies, but often because of the engineering skills. So in this case, we usually integrate once per quarter or something like that. In this case, you need to integrate at least one per sprint to have a working software every sprint. In this case, you either integrate every 5 minutes or you have a huge problem with integration at the end of every sprint. So you end up with having a kind of integration conquest at the end of the sprint when all the teams are trying to integrate the software into the code. And you know what? It doesn't work together. So you need to learn new skills, which are super necessary. We call them agile engineering skills, which are super necessary in this model, but are not so much critical in this model. So if you're thinking about this approach, then there are 3 things you can consider. So first of all, or maybe, few questions you need to consider. First of all, you need to ask the most important question, is it a problem for us? I'm running out of space here. And what you can discover is that this model could be a pretty good solution for you, especially if you're in outsourcing. What you may discover that your customer just outsource this part of the system to you. So you're not responsible for the whole system, you're just responsible for the part of the system. If so, they are paying you to be fast and busy on the part of the system, not for being agile. This is basically system when we are busy. So if you're earning money, as your company is earning money for being busy, then basically this is a great model because you will have a lot of money, right? From your customer, not from the users, by the way. So first of all, figure out it is a problem. Point number 2 is managers seeing this problem. So is management ready? Are managers ready? So here's the thing. If it's not painful enough for you, the organization will stay with this system because system 0.1 is easier than system 2 or 3. So my experience is only when it's super painful for management, they're gonna change it. And I just heard a story from one telco in Poland. They used to be in this system, and they decide to move to this system only because they were way behind the schedule. And by the way, they improved the engineering practices, like agile testing engineering practices, just because they had huge problems with the quality of the system. So unless it's painful for your management, then they're not gonna change it. So one of the things, if you're thinking about the model 2 or 3, one of the things you need to consider is why it is a pain for your manager, not why it is pain for you, because if you go to your manager and say, hey, this is painful for us, he will say, yeah, let's have a retrospective about that. But if you explain to your manager that it's painful for him, that he bears the consequences of having this system rather than this system, then you can have a conversation about what we do about this one. So my preferred question is, what you cannot do because you're working like this. And many times what we discover that in this system, managers are super busy managing dependencies rather than doing anything else. So what you end up with is having managers running from meeting to meeting to make sure that something is happening, and they don't have anything related about strategy, what is going to happen next, how to develop people. They just don't have time. They want to do it, but they don't have the time. So this model, managers will be super busy with coordination. And this model can give them more time for doing other things. But they need to know that this is a problem because it won't change without management support. This is the big change. You need to change the structure of the organization, and it won't happen without the management support. So Todd, you mentioned this yesterday. Let me just try to put it on. So again, Todd mentioned this yesterday about small incremental changes and the big changes. If you think about this like from Kaizen approach, this is like a Kaizen, this is a small changes we have here, but also what you need to often do is do a kaikaku. If you're working in the waterfall model, and often Kaizen is not the solution because you get a better waterfall model. So if you move from waterfall to more waterfall-ish model or more waterfall model with the work in progress limit, then sorry, you're still in the waterfall model. So what you end up with is you discover that the change needs to be big. You need to change the structure. The next thing you should not do is go to the team and tell them how they need to work from tomorrow, because that won't work again. So the next point on my list is ask the question, are devs ready? And by devs, I mean all the people. You know, there is a framework when we call all those people developers. I think it's Scrum. And the next thing is, don't go to people and tell, from tomorrow, you're gonna change the whole way of working, and I'm gonna tell you which team you are in. Because people don't know each other, they have, you know, some emotions, good, bad, about the other people. And if you go to them and tell them, hey, this is how I discovered the team is gonna work from tomorrow, that's not gonna fly. So you need to educate those people. And what we do, we ask those people to go into one room, like 50, 60, 70 people, 90 people, and figure out what is the structure that we're going to have from tomorrow. So creation of this team is not done by management. Creation of the team is done by the teams. We call this self-organization. Number 4 to consider is, what is the scope? So now, if you have like 20 people in your organization, then the scope is your organization. But if you have 500 people in your organization, don't make a 500 people change. That's not gonna fly. Don't try to make everybody agile at the same place, because you're gonna end up with this one, agile by its name only. Again, if it's not the problem, that's not the problem, right? But if you want to have this kind of structure, what is the scope? How many teams we're gonna implement? How are we gonna define the product? Are we gonna define the separate products, like a narrow definition of product? Are we going to define broader definition of product? How long are we gonna run the experiment? How are we gonna know that we have succeed? All this conversation, my recommendation, make it before, not after the switch. So number 5 is clear success criteria. I'm missing T. Now it should be fine, I believe. So how do we recognize we have a success? Now, the thing here is have a success criteria which are business-oriented, but also have a success criteria which are people-oriented. People and interaction, you maybe remember this one. So business-oriented is like a faster lead time. For example, I don't know, we solve the problems from 2015 that are still in our backlog. We have less complaints from the customer. We can react to customer problems in 5 minutes rather than 5 years. So recently we had a situation with my customer when their customer started complaining because they knew that from the starting complaint to solving the problems usually takes months. And we say, because we had this system, we say, hey, tomorrow we're gonna take one team, send it to you, and they're gonna sit with your people to solve the problem. And they say, we're not ready. So the customer of my customer was so surprised with the fast answer that they say, we're not ready. So basically, we solve the problem in 5 minutes by telling them, we're ready, you guys are not. So business things is like, how do we see that we're getting more business? We don't do this change to be agile. We do this change to be better at business. But people are also, this is also an important part of the system. So how do we know we get better? People find more fun, are more engaged. They say it's better to work here. Again, make it in your context. So don't try to take my advices, just come up with your better idea. So Um, okay, so what's next? So we're running mostly of the time. Few ideas. First of all, if you want to look at this model, go to less.works site. It's look like 1950s, by the way, but there's a lot of information inside. So let me try to show it to you. Yeah, so you get all the frameworks, all those ideas, all the case studies here. A lot of information there. So start from this one. There's also some ideas about how to approach transformation, and there are a few good ideas I want to mention here. So something we called principles, 3 principles for having this change. And the first principle is don't try to do this just from bottom up, or don't try to impose this on the team. So don't try to do this top down. We try to do this both directions. So we do the top down and bottom, which basically means engage developers, engage engineers, engage management. You cannot do this just from one side. It's not going to work. The next point is define how broadly you are. So here, and basically our recommendation is deep and narrow over broad and shallow. Don't try to change the whole organization unless you have 50 people in your organization. Don't try to make it the whole company agile, because it's not gonna fly. Basically, what you are going to happen when you move to this one, you're gonna discover all the problems you have in your organization, which were not visible here, because here everybody was just being busy. So everybody was just running, trying to do something. But here, what you discover is you have plenty of problems. You don't know how to deploy every day. You don't know how to work together. You have no idea how to integrate the code every few minutes. You have all this problem coming up, showing up. You want to discover this problem on 50 people group, not on 500 people group, okay? And last but not least, use volunteers. If you want this model to fail, then force people into this model. They're gonna prove you are wrong. It's difficult enough to move to this model that you don't want people to show you that it doesn't make sense. You want people to join you on the bandwagon. The moment you try to force people into this model or this model, this is going to successfully fail. People are gonna show you that it makes sense, and 3 months later, formally or informally, you'll be in this model again. So educate people, explain what is going on, and then take the volunteers only. So the moment we do this switch, the big change, basically we ask people to join, but if you don't want to join, then we're not going to force you, because otherwise it's not going to fly. And because I'm running out of the time, few recommendations. Less.works. You can also go to Get Agile podcast. I have few interviews there with people who know Less pretty well, so they can tell you about those concepts again. You can catch me on LinkedIn, ask more questions, and you can catch me today as well during the conference and ask even more questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tomasz, for your wonderful session and nice technical presentation. I'm gonna learn this from you and use it in future. Thank you.
Thanks. Do we have time for questions or not really? Not really.
So is there? Yeah, we have 1 or 2 minutes. So any questions from anyone? Yes.
All right. So if we move from your 2.0 to 3.0, I mean, move to less. So what we'll do with the extra roles? Like in 2.0, we have multiple product owners, and now we have one product owners. So how we'll do with the extra people, like the previous product owners, what will they do in an established organization?
Once again, what do we?
I mean, if we go to the 2.0, so we have multiple product owners
Yes.
here. And when we will move to 3.0, we have only one product owner.
Yes.
So what we'll do with the extra product owners where we have 2.0?
So there is more interesting thing happening here is basically if you look at this one, you will have a lot of coordinators, which when you move from this one to this one, you end up with having a lot of coordination that you don't know what to do. And again, moving from this one to this one is also happening that you have a lot of people who you are not quite sure what to do. Now the question, what we can do about this one? Often, when you discover in this model, like those people who we used to call product owners, they're just the business analyst, and they can join the teams. So that's one option. So in this case, what you can find is like you can ask them to join the teams. The other options, they can be supporting the product owners, but my recommendation, just make sure that you don't end up with having a separate analyst team. So those people don't end up with having a separate analyst team. So the problem with this model is that those people will be fighting for the same space on the same system. So they may not be interested in cooperation. They will be forced to cooperate anyway. But when the moment you move here, you have few people and you need to ask them what you can do. So my recommendation, ask people. They're smart people. And again, my observation, some people will leave, especially when you move from this system. People who are pretty fond of working in this system, they will hate those two systems. Just to make it clear, it's not awesome from the all people perspective, right? And if you move from this system to this system, some people will find a new way, so like more joining the team, helping product owners, whatever, but some people will also be unhappy with this system. Thanks.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time.